as for now, this physical activity paradox, part 4. So this is part 4 of an online course. I'm not trying to sell you anything here, but this is part of the online course, which is available through the on the RockTape online course platform. And it's also chapter 4 of a new book that I'm writing. I will share the chapter draft with you for free on the Physio Channel Facebook group. So hopefully you're a member of the Physio Channel professional group on Facebook already. If not, please apply and just say, whether you're a therapist of some kind, and I will post this up there for you. So you've got the draft. It's about 1,500 words with a page of references. So things that we've been talking about tonight, you can look up the further references as well. So that's on the Physio Channel professional group on Facebook if you're watching this on the recorded playback. Let's get started. All right. So this is a study that caught my attention. That identified there's a difference between occupational physical activity and leisure time physical activity. So work-related exercise, if you will, and chosen leisure exercise. There appears to be a difference in terms of how it either positively or negatively impacts your health. And there's a bit of research around the physical activity paradox, but there's also some research around the idea of forced activity versus chosen activity, particularly in mice and rats. But in human studies, there's some interesting research looking at if people exercise at their preferred level, then the outcomes are much more positive, both physically and psychologically, than if people are forced to exercise even just slightly above their preferred level. And again, that shows the difference between work-related exercise and leisure-related exercise. And maybe there's a third category that we don't discuss tonight, and that's performance-related exercise. So when people are pushing themselves to train for an event, or if they're part of a group, for example, then there may be some differences that we see there as well. But that's beyond our discussion tonight, although we will touch upon it again in a moment. So these are the questions that I have for you. I won't ask them, but they are there on the screen. So have a look at them and have a think about them, because I will ask you to type in on the chat in just a moment. So I just saw the comment from Suzanne about Mike's Speedos. Oh, you found him as well, Catherine and Beverly. Oh, great. I'm glad you enjoyed the game. Hi, Ian. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Okay. So where were we? Let's talk about physical activity. Now, physical activity is good for us. We know that. Physical inactivity is bad for us. We know that. The World Health Organization puts physical inactivity as a risk factor at number 4. It's a 4th risk factor. It's above obesity, below high blood glucose, and high blood pressure is the highest there. So it's in that top 4 category. But we know also that obesity, high blood glucose, high blood pressure are also associated with inactivity as well. So inactivity is right at the top of the risk factors. The World Health Organization also stated in one of their statements in 2010 that in countries with high levels of occupational and transportational physical activity, which might be the UK if the government encourages us to walk and cycle more with the lack of public transport available at the moment, then these high levels of activity may not be the result of efforts to improve health, but these activities can actually improve the health of the population. So in countries where they can't sit on trains and drive easily, and they have to walk or cycle due to the way their city is set up or due to more economic factors, that this has positive impacts on their health. And this is a broad statement. And at first you could agree with it. You could say, yeah, sure, if people have to walk to work or cycle to work, then that's obviously going to be good for their health. But actually, if you look at the look at what that's saying, if you look at the statistics and you look at some epidemiological research, we can think, well, actually, how far do they have to travel to work? What do they have to do at work? And if they do get, exhausted, then do they have an option to have a rest? cycling, walking is, we'll put that to one side. But if people are cycling a good distance to work, that's brilliant. But if they're doing that day in, day out and working hard at work and at home, perhaps, then they may not have an opportunity to get a rest. And that may then start to present a factor which could actually be bad for the health. So let me just explain that a little bit further, because I'm not just assuming there, I'm basing this on further research. So in a review in 2013, they looked at 23 epidemiological studies. And what they found in just over 750,000 people that they studied was that moderate to high levels of leisure time physical activity was associated with a reduced risk of coronary heart disease. So there's no surprises there, guys, is there? The people that do a lot of physical activity have a reduced risk of heart disease, and there was a dose relationship. So people that do more physical activity are doing much better. However, when they then looked at occupational activity, anywhere from a moderate to high levels, actually they saw a small increased risk of cardiovascular disease in these epidemiological studies. So they're looking at correlations there. They can't be sure about the links. And I mean, that's interesting. That's showing that the activity at work is potentially bad for the health if it's at a moderate to high level. And we need to think about why that might be in just a moment, because there's many factors that could contribute to that. But it basically suggests that occupational physical activity, being active at work, exercise at work, doesn't offer the same protective effect on our health as leisure time physical activity. So the questions here on the screen, have we seen this in clinic? And the differences we'll have a look at in a moment. So if you could please write in and give me some examples of any of those questions. Can you think of some patient examples? I certainly can. Think of builders who are very physically active yet are overweight or have bad backs quite commonly. I can think of farmers who are very active yet they often suffer from fatigue and unexplained aches and pains. How do you think this contributes to their pain or injury? I've certainly seen situations where people have a high amount of activity at work, and this has either directly contributed to a physical issue like plantar fascia heel pain, or contributed to overall health where they just appear to be rather physically overworked and unable to take a proper rest. And the final question, thanks for writing in, I'll get to those in just a second. What are the difficulties in managing these patients? It might be that their job is a major contributor, and without any significant changes, then their condition and their pain condition is likely to perpetuate or to keep reoccurring. It may be that they have to tackle some rather difficult things in their life in order to make some adjustments, or it may be that they don't recognize activity at work as actually counting as physical activity or counting as exercise. And when they try and add their leisure exercise, and this is something we'll talk about as well in more depth, when they try and add leisure physical activity, leisure exercise to their occupational work-based activity, they don't realize that the two things actually do add up and do summate and can contribute towards an overall overtraining type syndrome. So we'll talk about that as well. Let's see what we've got come through. Builder with a belly and bad back. Thank you, Beverly. I've certainly seen a few patients which fit that bill. Suzanne, continual back pain in a landscape gardener who 2 days after treatment is in pain again. Also too tired when it comes, oh yeah, brilliant. Too tired when it comes to doing exercises at home. Yeah, you've really hit the nail on the head there. I believe that's one of the key problems as well. So often people will think that they've done a lot of physical activity at work, especially if they're a landscape gardener. So therefore they won't feel that they need to do any leisure time physical activity because they're active at work and that keeps them fit. And we'll look at why that doesn't really make sense when we look at the differences between the two things, why that doesn't really offer them the same health benefits and protective benefits as leisure-based exercise. But also, as you quite rightly said, Suzanne, if they're too tired after a day at work, that's likely to reduce the likelihood of them engaging in some leisure activity. And that makes complete sense. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does make complete sense for those individuals as well. Some people, I really believe, would find it very difficult to meet the government's recommended physical activity guidelines, especially if they have other other responsibilities when they get home that sees them just simply not having the time as well as the energy to do these leisure activities. Ian, lots of neck, shoulder pain in office workers I've treated. Yeah, thanks, Ian. Absolutely. So it's thought that that in these patients, particularly around the upper trapezius, and I've spoken before about some research around this, that the low levels of low levels of stimulation and low levels of minimal activity can cause muscular changes that can make the muscles not only basically less fit, but potentially more pain sensitive. And in one study, they identified these things that they referred to as megafibers. So we know we've got muscle fibers, type 2, type 1, but they identified these megafibers, which were these large, what they described as mothball type muscle fibers, which were big but rather useless. And they thought that that may be a potential contributor to pain, because people with neck pain had poor muscle quality and the presence of these megafibers within the muscle as well. So although these office workers aren't using their muscles in a training capacity, the very fact the muscles are in a sometimes sustained static postures for long periods of time can bring about some negative changes to those muscles. So the solution that they suggested, and one that I recommend in clinic, is to actually take those tight neck muscles and expose them to a proper strength and conditioning program and some heavy load in order to improve the quality of the muscle, and along the way, hopefully reduce the pain as well. Thanks, Ian. Catherine, is this looking at the neat that people may not do enough daily? People stuck at their desks all day is the main ailment I see. Yeah, absolutely. People stuck at their desks. That is different, really. I mean, aside from what we were talking about with Ian there, we're talking here about people who have high levels of physical activity. Let me give you some examples. So down here in Cornwall at the moment, we've got quite a lot of flower pickers and vegetable pickers, where people are working physically all day, picking up and bending. It's not that physically demanding necessarily, but if you do it all day, 7-8 hours plus, and if you do it day in, day out, then you can understand that there is going to be a significant level of fatigue and a significant lack of recovery as well. So that's one example. Other examples might be bin men, for example, going around, doing lots of doing their job basically. But you can imagine if they're working at that level all the time, then there may be a lack of rest and also not enough stimulus to get the benefits from the exercise. So it's a low level of exercise below that stimulus threshold that would trigger a positive exercise response. And I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. Thumb and wrist pain in office-based clients. Yeah, thank you, Ian. That's interesting. I mean, if you take a condition like lateral epicondylitis, epicondylalgia, tennis elbow, we see that tennis elbow can occur from tennis, but it can also occur from typing, which is, it's almost two ends of the spectrum, really. So yeah, it's quite interesting how you can have these repetitive strain injuries pop up in these situations. So thanks for sending those through. Let me just talk a little bit more now about what we're discussing here. So here's a few key points for you. Exercise at work, people with physically active jobs. I'm not talking about going to the gym at lunchtime. That's an entirely different thing. But people with physically active jobs, often their work is too low intensity to increase their cardiovascular health or strength. So if we take Suzanne's gardener, he's been doing his job for some time, so I doubt it's too much of a physical stimulus for him. I assume he's been doing it for some time. Then the intensity for him is low intensity, so it's not enough to really boost his cardiovascular health or boost his strength, because it's a low level of activity that he's very, very used to. In addition, and not this individual specifically, but to some people who are working at low levels, the prolonged elevation of heart rate and blood pressure and the prolonged inflammatory markers have been linked to cardiovascular disease. So prolonged levels of raised inflammation have been linked to cardiovascular disease. And when we exercise, there's an increase in inflammatory mediators, but that's balanced by an increase in anti-inflammatory mediators when we exercise. And the more we exercise, the lower our levels of resting inflammatory mediators. So our body gets better at dealing with inflammation if we keep exposing it to bouts of exercise repetitively. Then our resting levels of inflammation are lower. And however, if you have low levels of physical activity or levels of physical activity that continue for long periods of time without adequate rest, then you don't have this ability to have that interplay, and it becomes more of a chronic situation, and inflammatory markers will be maintained for long periods of time due to the activity and lack of rest and lack of stimulus rest recovery response, if you will. And this has been thought to link to the increase in cardiovascular risk, which we mentioned at the start when we looked at how occupational physical activity can make that difference. There's also there's low control over effort, duration, and rest breaks with a poor recovery time. If you're self-employed, you may have more control, but I've met so many self-employed people who, by their very nature of being self-employed, are very independent and are often, one step behind their workload. So even though they do have control in theory, they really don't have control because they don't have anyone that they can fall back on or hand work over to. So they often end up working too hard in many situations. If you've got somebody like a flower picker, or somebody who's in, a road worker or something, they've been given a job to do, they may feel exhausted on that day. They may have had a busy weekend. They may have had a busy day at work the day before. But unlike if you've worked hard in training, if you're at work and you've been given a physical task, it has to get done. So they've got very little control over the effort. They can try and take it easy a bit, but if they've got a physical job, they've got low control over what they're doing. And rest breaks will be dictated by the job role rather than them thinking, you know what, I'm going to have a rest today, phone at work and say I'm not coming in, I'm going to just take a day off just to recover. Those things are much more difficult to do. And as we mentioned before, the energy cost may reduce motivation to take exercise afterwards as well. Just to add a bit more science into it, I mentioned the inflammatory element, but there's also our autonomic nervous system, which I like to refer to as our automatic nervous system, because it regulates our heart rate and our breathing and digestive systems, etc. But the autonomic nervous system is in a constant balancing act between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic elements. Now, what is thought is that with this continued physical activity, we have an excess of sympathetic drive. So there's this excess of this fight-flight response, if you will. Not to the extent where you're having a panic attack or you're having a boost of adrenaline. But as you know, for any of us who've worked in a situation that's new to us or invigorating to us, that positively we can have a sympathetic drive in that we have some adrenaline that boosts us. We've got a client appointment to make, or we've got a new client, or we've got things which motivate us positively. However, if that is continual and we have too much continued sympathetic drive, then it's thought that this causes an imbalance in our autonomic nervous system, our autonomic regulation. Essentially, what I'm talking about here is being overworked, and in athletic terms, being overtraining and excessive drive as well. So this is thought to help to contribute towards the cardiovascular elements, in addition to the inflammatory parts that we talked about as well. So when a patient says, I keep fit at work, that's something that I now question. I thought for a long time that there was something not quite right about people saying they keep fit at work when clearly they were not fit. So when people say they keep fit at work, I really do question the efficacy of that and consider that when I'm assessing the patient, and considering that as when I look at what factors could be contributing to their dysfunction, their pain, and their overall musculoskeletal issue. We all meet patients which we know don't do enough exercise at all, but we also meet patients that are sometimes physically overworking by the nature of the volume of the physical activity that they're doing, more so than the intensity. Therapeutic exercise, leisure exercise, has a much more focused and intensive stimulus. It's driven by your conscious desire to do it for various different reasons, but then it's also followed by some rest. We all look forward to the rest we get after we've been exercising and working hard. But if we've been working hard physically throughout the day, yes, sure, we can look forward to a rest. But if that's day in, day out, then we may be losing out on those health benefits that are generally associated with exercise. Ian, just reading your comment there. More tiring than training myself. 4 classes a day. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. And mentally draining as well. Absolutely. So in my line of work, I've met quite a few aerobics instructors who have at one time in their career worked full time as an aerobics instructor. And I remember one of my educators way back who used to do more classes, Ian, aerobics classes all day, and then be doing things in the gym in the day as well. And back then, I assumed that they must be super fit, like an athlete. They're just doing aerobics all day and many classes. But they said actually they have never been more unhealthy. They were just eating the wrong foods in order to keep their energy levels up. They were drained and had low energy because they were constantly doing these classes as well. Although I did meet a lady that said the opposite, that she always had energy, was always on the go, but did admit that she didn't think it was the healthiest thing to do. So yeah, this is the things that I wanted to go through with you. I've got a conclusion coming up in a moment. There was one other point I wanted to make that I see in clinic quite often, and that's if somebody is engaging in good leisure physical activity, they're doing their cardio, they're doing their resistance training. However, they also have a very physical job. People often don't connect those two together. And I've seen many a time where somebody is trying to be an athlete or to train like a professional athlete or to push themselves to that professional athletic level and keep up a busy day job and their responsibilities outside of work. So they're really pushing themselves physically, mentally, and for time as well. So then maybe their sleep starts to suffer as well. The difference between a professional athlete and an amateur athlete, of course, is that the professional should have a lot more time to rest and to look after their diet, their rest and recovery, and their sleep, because that's as important as all of their training. The more they train, the more intensive they train, the more they have to take care of all the other stuff for the 22 hours or whatever that they're not training. But that's not always that well known. It's not always that interesting. It's not always that fascinating. It's not the sort of thing that you put on Instagram. The stuff that makes it onto Instagram is what training they did and pictures of them training and how intense their training was. So we're always exposed to this training element, but we're less exposed to, unless we work in those health and fitness and rehab training circles, we're less exposed to what these athletes are doing the rest of the time. And if they're a professional athlete, they're probably not working 12-hour days. And they're probably not doing a bunch of other stuff that's going to impact on their training. And this is one of the problems that I often see in patients is they will train really hard and they've got fantastic motivation, but they end up doing themselves a disservice picking up an injury because they don't recognize that outside of their training, the other things they're doing are also contributing to their levels of fatigue as well. And that's both physical and mental. So watch out for that when you're speaking to your next runner who's telling you about their training program. Make sure you ask them about what they do for a job, and make sure you ask them about their other responsibilities as well, because these need to be factored in to the overall management and rehabilitation. I think I've covered these, but just to make sure, clinical relevance, occupational activity needs to be understood and factored in. That's what I just mentioned. Okay. When people say I keep fit at work, we need to understand that and question that further, recognizing that if it's work-related activity that is at a low level, it's probably not enough to stimulate the health benefits associated with leisure activity. Is there an occupational link for those patients with fatigue and pain syndromes? That's a question. I personally think there is, based on my own clinical experience. I'll often meet people who seem to have very physically exhausting lives in general, and I can't help but think this has had something to do with the onset of their fatigue and pain syndromes. And when you look at cortisol levels and low levels of inflammatory markers, etc., you know, there are definite correlations with these things here. And of course, managing patients with persistent pain or with fatigue issues, a big part of their successful management is pacing. And it was probably a lack of pacing that potentially brought on some of these issues in the first place. But we won't go diving down those rabbit holes today. Supports specific leisure activity as superior to and different from work-related physical tasks. Yep. Okay. So leisure activity, chosen physical activity, specific exercise is superior and different to work-related physical activity. That's a key point and something we need to just bear in mind when we're having discussions with patients. So in conclusion, I'll just read this and then I'll get to your comment there. Thank you, Beverly. Conclusion: the research supports specific leisure activity as superior to and different from work-related physical activity. They are different. There is a risk of misinterpreting this evidence to suggest that exercise at work is bad for you. There is a risk of doing that, because I've certainly met people who are active at work and are just generally fit and healthy, and clearly their work is good for them and working for them. So it's not a case that doing physical jobs is bad for you. I don't believe that's true. And it's not a case that physical activity at work doesn't count. I think that's not true. I think it's just important to recognize that there is a difference and to identify those factors in each individual that we see and treat. This would be a gross oversimplification if we thought that exercise at work was bad for you, but the physical activity paradox does clarify the difference between job-related activity and leisure activity, significant enough to factor it into our assessment and rehab planning. Beverly, as a former triathlete, my physical shape was much less than it is now. Okay, great that you get this. Great that you understand it, not a reference to your shape. My physical shape was, I'm just trying to understand what you're referring to there. Former triathlete, physical shape was much less. Okay, I think you're saying that you're feeling better now, you're feeling healthier now, you're in better shape now than you were when you were training as a triathlete. If you're saying that, I think I understand that myself from a personal point of view. I used to be a semi-professional mountain biker, which involved an awful lot of road cycling and fitness training and dieting and weight loss and everything. And I was super fit on a bike, but I didn't always necessarily feel the peak of health, and I certainly was lacking a upper body strength as well. Yeah, that makes sense, Beverly. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So that's concludes our session today. Just a couple of things to tell you, then I'll take some questions if you have some. I have just finished, and it almost killed me, the vibration therapy online course. And I'm not selling you anything here, guys. It's free. So if you haven't had a look at this, then please do. The first few videos, there's one on the research elements. The first few videos are, or the research one in particular, is of interest and something with a bit of an academic backing to it. And then there's the techniques, which are relatively simple, but give you an idea if you haven't used a vibration gun before. So please have a look at that online course, and the flows I think I mentioned previously, they're now available from us and from the Rocked UK website and from the Flow website as well, which I'm just trying to recall the Flow Sports Tech website. Anyway, we've also launched our live streams, which Mike has been really successfully delivering for us. And as you can see, the next two are fully booked as well. He's got a taping one this week. The reason I'm showing you this is because we are going to have more live streams on there. We're going to have rock pot. We've got pods. We're going to have more pods. We're going to have blades, and we're going to have taping, and all of our other courses as well. We're going to live stream. And the aim is to develop the most convenient courses, convenient because you can do the courses in the evenings over the course of 1 to 2 hours each evening, live with the instructor and with the other students. So you don't have to miss work, and you can do whatever you want in the day, have your dinner and do the course, and then watch telly afterwards. So there's minimal disruption to your life, no loss of income, super convenient for you. Plus, you don't have to go anywhere, so it's convenient, but also you save a ton of money, because even when we can travel more to courses, you don't need to travel, you don't need to stay, you don't need to sit on a train for a long time. So we're trying to make the most cost-effective and convenient live stream courses with lots of interaction. We have an interactive Facebook group as well, so you put in your videos and you get feedback from the instructor. So you actually get more time and more feedback than you would get on an attendance course as well. We're really trying to make something here which really does offer a solution and tick many boxes for people, rather than just a solution to the short-term course issues. So these live streams are here to stay, because I think they really do represent a great solution for people moving forwards. So just keep an eye out for those, guys. Please do follow me on the Physio channel. I think most of you do already. YouTube is the main platform where this webinar will be posted, and other videos as well. The Facebook group and Instagram. On the Facebook group, Physio channel professional group, I will put the draft of this chapter so you can have a look at it and look at the references. That'll be up there soon. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.